Canta, irmão, canta, meu irmão, que a liberdade é hino e homem é a certeza, com dignidade inteira semente, no boa da ilha nua, na despenhadeira da vida, esperança é tudo a mano de mar, que nos abraças, sentinelas de mares e ventos perseverantes.
The United States Happy Independence Day to Cape Verde. So can we have a round of applause for Independence Day? My name is Mark Schmidt. If I haven't had a chance to make your acquaintance, I'm the executive director here at the Falmouth Historic Society Museums on the Green. There's some people I'd like to thank for coming. With Senator Vinnie Macedo, Representative David Vieira, Professor Richard Lobin. Kenita Rose will be singing. If everybody had a chance to get an itinerary, after some people will make some opening remarks, Kenita will sing, and then we're actually going to read the speech that was first presented in 1852 in New York State by Frederick Douglass. My thanks for everyone who's come from long distance. We actually have distinguished visitors from all over, as well as Washington, D.C. So can I introduce Vinnie Macedo and David Vieira? Just to welcome you, and then we're going to have Dr. Logan.
Thank you so much for allowing me to participate today. This is such a wonderful opportunity in the community as we get together and we read this amazing passage or speech that was given by Frederick Douglass. For those of you who don't know, in the Senate, just recently we had totally refurbished, and in the Senate we have one of Frederick Douglass's quotes. And it's the only quote that we have up in the Senate right now. It is, "Truth, justice, humanity, and liberty will ultimately prevail." And that is just a powerful thing. It was, as we in the Senate, we had to vote, the members of the legislature in the Senate, to decide what we were going to use as you know, there isn't a lot of space, and you need to say something special, and this is what we chose as a Senate, as a body, to put up there. So it gives you a sense of how we believe his importance in our country's history. So to that extent, I'm so honored to be here and to participate in a small way. For those of you who don't know, I know this, we're talking about Cape Verde history. I was born in the Cape Verde Islands. I was born on the island of Brava. Came here in 1966 as a baby. So it is, this is even more fitting and exciting for me to participate. So with that, so thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, David Vieira.
Thanks, Ben. You know, a lot of folks asked me over the last few weeks, how did this all come about today? And it came about 3.5 years ago. I'm in Stop and Shop. And Kenny Andre walks up to me. And he goes, "You're Vieira from T-Ticket, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, I know your father, Billy." He goes, "What are you doing for the Cape Verdeans in East Falmouth? What are you doing for our history?" Because I'm Portuguese American, and we've had a lot of events. We have a very active association. We've done a lot with Portuguese American history in Falmouth. And I looked at him and I said, "Kenny, this is a challenge. We're going to embark on doing some things to tell the story and the stories of the Cape Verdeans here in Falmouth." And I met Barbara Virgo, Wesley Lake, Wayne Lobo from the association. We sat down and we said, let's have an event to celebrate the Cape Verdean independence, July 5th. Oh, and by the way, we have a state program from Mass Humanities who funds the Frederick Douglass Community Reads. So we said, this is a great opportunity because Douglass actually gave his speech on the 5th of July. It's also the day of independence of Cape Verde. And so let's marry these two programs together. And so today we'll have our program here, and at 3 o'clock we hope you'll be able to join us on Sandwich Road at the Cape Verdean Association of Falmouth Clubhouse, which is one of the oldest in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to celebrate the 10 islands and have a little taste of each of the islands. Can't wait for some chupa. But thank you all for being here. Look forward to participating. And hopefully this is the first of an annual event where we read this speech and we continue the community dialogue about what the 4th of July means to all members of our community.
Thank you, David.
In came John Reed, and most of you know him already. He is the president of the Cape Cod branch of the NAACP.
Okay. First and foremost, thank you for having me today. I got caught up in the traffic coming from Miami. So 1 hour later, I'm here. And I'm saying, I know what this is. I even told other people about it. So once again, the NAACP is alive and well. I work with everybody all the time. The museum is alive and well. That's open 7 days a week when people can find me. Okay. Today I'm out here, so the museum is not open. Nevertheless, thank you for having me. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, committee. And hello, Candy.
Amina Pilgrim. Amina, just come say hello just for 1 second. This is Dr. Amina Pilgrim. She is one of our most widely renowned, widely celebrated young Cape Verdean, we say Creoles, huh? In Providence, 2 years, two years, I have gone and said hello to my friend Amina, who is also an artist, and so you will hear some from her. And she's hosting one of the tables at the Taste of Cape Verde. But the special thing with Amina is she also co-hosted Poderosa. Explain Poderosa 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, first, good afternoon again, and thank you all for being here for this amazing occasion. Frederick Douglass is one of my heroes, and Cabo Verde obviously is our home and our passion, so it's awesome to be here. Barbara mentioned Poderosa, which is an international conference on Cabo Verdean women that I co-founded with Dr. Terza Lima Neves, who was in North Carolina. And it happens every other year in Providence, Rhode Island, where we celebrate the lesser known accomplishments of Cabo Verdean women. And I believe Dr. Neves was Dr. Logan's student. So a lot of connections in the room. I also do a lot in the Cape Verdean community in Brockton, where I have a youth program, and have done many different things where I connect with my sister Candida and Barbara. So together we try to lift up all of the wonderful things that Cape Verdeans have done in this region, so that people don't forget, so that young people don't forget, and so that they can feel inspired and proud of who they are. So it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, back in the far back, for hosting this and getting it so well organized. And thank you, Barbara, for your sweet remarks, and thanks for Carolyn to be here. It really is a privilege and an honor to be out here in Falmouth. There's so many friends. It's a family reunion practically for so many people that I've seen and known. Well, as you heard from Mark's preliminary remarks, this is the 5th anniversary of Cape Verdean independence. So 44 years ago, I was in Cape Verde for Cape Verdean independence, and then went over to Guinea-Bissau, where I had been a journalist covering the War of Independence. So I'm pretty familiar with those particular landmarks. If you like those kind of numbers, this was 201 years ago that Frederick Douglass was born. So since many of you are not so familiar with this important 5th of July address in 1852, I was asked as the visiting scholar or whatever to give you some background to Frederick Douglass. We're employees of the U.S. Navy, so this is not the Navy's position. They might agree, they might not agree. This is just my own personal remarks. And special thanks again to Barbara. So here's the beginning of the story, 1818. Of course, we don't know what his African name was, and his first name was simply the name of his slave masters. He had several different slave masters in the Maryland area, in Baltimore, my hometown, where actually I was raised by an African-American woman myself. And this is the course of his life from 1818 till 1895. And I do recommend anyone who goes down to D.C., go to Frederick Douglass's house. It's an absolutely incredible experience. That's the very room where he actually passed away. It's a very prominent house. I mean, to start from more humble than being a slave and die as a liberator of all America. Just before this program started, we had the important reading of the Declaration of Independence, but I couldn't help but notice that women were not included in the Declaration of Independence, and African Americans were not included in the Declaration of Independence, and Native Americans were called savages to defend the arguments of George Washington. So it was a great Declaration of Independence for maybe 15-20% of the American population. So it's pretty big shortfalls. That shortfall was addressed in this unbelievably important commentary. What does the Declaration of Independence mean to someone who started as a slave? And you'll discover that he had tremendous gift of oratory. He was an incredible speaker, but pretty much self-trained. And he could start off with humility and great respect for the Declaration of Independence, and then ended up with stinging criticism for all of the notorious shortfalls that the Declaration of Independence represented to any woman, any Native American, and any African American, for sure. So that's roughly how he looked. Liberated first by being taught by enlightened or liberal master's wives. That's how he learned to read. And reading, of course, is, until this very moment, the critical point of personal liberation to have access to knowledge, to spirit, to information. And he fled from Baltimore, I said in quotations, as a free sailor, because he actually fled on a train, but he had a fraudulent pass card from sailors, because in Baltimore, where we had some important people like Paul Cuffey sailing from Fairhaven down to Baltimore, they just could not believe that an African is owning a shipping company like Paul Cuffey. That's another story. But they were pretty familiar with, people, African descent people on the dockyard. So he had acquired, by some means or another, a document which did not really represent him, except it said he's an African American. And when the conductor asked for his pass, he just kind of tipped back the part that looked official and said, everything's in order. And of course, in the great fear of being a victim from the Fugitive Slave Act. So that's how this story begins. He fled initially up to New York from Baltimore, stayed there, met his wife, and then went over to Newport, Rhode Island. But Newport, Rhode Island has a really stinking history relative to the slave trade. And so he said, I don't really feel too comfortable there. Let me move on as fast as possible to New Bedford. So this is his first exposure to the Cape Verdean community, because even in the 1850s, the Cape Verdean community / whaling community was already very well established. Later on, of course, as industrial workers, and then even for in this area, the ties to the cranberry, blueberry, strawberry industries, which are represented in the movie about the Harwich Historical Society. So that's the first kind of tie up to the Cape Verdean community. Well, he, needless to say, as a slave, was attracted to the abolitionist movement, and would speak and learn about, other oratorical skills and factual skills, so that he became a speaker for the Anti-Slavery Society, which was getting its grassroots in the North, where, of course, we had lots of hypocrisy in the North. Plenty of people making their money on the slave trade, but not having as many slaves here as in Charleston or New Orleans or some other place. So Rhode Island and Providence Plantation still has that name, and they were slave plantations in Rhode Island, just to be sure about that. So he stopped at Newport, as I mentioned, but he wanted to leave and then went over to New Bedford. And it was from New Bedford that when the berry industry started in the Cape, that's where they got the cheap agricultural labor from New Bedford, recruited over here as seasonal, berry picking labor. So I put another picture of Douglas a little bit older, and then next to a picture of Cape Verdeans and the whaling business, which of course was important in this area all through the whole Cape, even from the 17th century, maybe even before that. So he started writing for the North Star, which was a sort of symbolic expression of the guidepost to go. Sometimes it's embedded in quilts where you'd have the North Star. For slaves who didn't read, they could always find the Polaris, and if they just kept going on the North Star and they didn't get caught by fugitive slave catchers or by slave masters, then they could cross up to the north. So that was a symbolic statement, and of course embedded in his newspaper. In 1845, he published his narrative of the life of a slave, which is of course very emotional, very informative about exactly what happened, and the famous literally fist fight he had with Covey, who was the slave breaker of that particular time. Well, it was in 1852, now you can do the math, on the 5th of July, right after the 4th, of course, where he made this famous speech. It should be read always in conjunction with the Declaration of Independence, because one tells the complete truth, and one tells the truth for maybe 15-20% of the American people. So this was in Rochester. Rochester was a center of women's liberation, by the way. He was always a key supporter of women's liberation. Fugitive slaves would go up through Rochester on their way to Canada, because even the North was, vulnerable by slave catchers. And then he publishes in 55 another book, gets more and more famous. 58, another big important date in Frederick Douglass's history, because he met up with John Brown. Not John Brown, the slave trader of Providence, Rhode Island, but John Brown, the liberator, and a brave person, but conceivably, according to Frederick Douglass, a little misguided and a little bit premature. And so Frederick Douglass was invited to join the projected raid on Harper's Ferry to seize arms right on the borderland between North and South, and with the arms seized, go into the South and distribute arms to slaves to liberate all of the South. John Brown's timing was a little bit off, because it's 1859. The war starts, of course, for the same thing, when the whole nation gets motivated on the Civil War. John Brown failed. He was executed. His body is still moldered in his grave. We've been to Harper's Ferry. Again, for anybody interested in American history, you will see at that critical meeting place, you'll see in the next town over where he was actually executed. So that was a good decision from the point of view of Douglass, because he survived still for many decades to inform us. And John Brown was, of course, executed. From 1861 to 64, of course, we had the bloodiest battle in all the many wars and battles that the United States has been engaged in. More Americans killed in North and South, and ultimately it was the battle for the liberation and the ending of formal slavery, with no reparations due to the slave owners, because the slaves had paid enough price as it was from the oppression of the slave trade. The issue of reparation, maybe if there's discussion afterwards, we could have a big discussion about that. And the key, from my point of view, is that we need to repair the very damaged historical record, and then we'll worry about the other things later on. So Lincoln was assassinated in '65 in the Ford Theater. Of course, this was a tremendous shock to the world, to everyone, except for maybe John Wilkes Booth. And the cane that Lincoln used was given to Frederick Douglass as a symbolic expression of the continuity of these two converging missions. Now, what's less known, partly because I worked for the Navy, he had, in the 70s, he had an illustrious career with the United States Navy. So in this case, you can see him on the left-hand side, on the U.S. Tennessee in Key West, where he sailed out of Key West to go to the Dominican Republic, or Saint Domingue, which was both Dominican Republic and Haiti on the other end. So that begins his first time basically out of the U.S., if I'm not mistaken. And so you can do Hispanic American history relative to Frederick Douglass. So that's another chapter of the story that needs to be told, and is now being told much more by this latest book on this question. So he became a federal marshal, and pretty highly salaried, so that he could afford a prominent and prestigious house. It's a very impressive home that he had in the District of Columbia, and he got another basically sinecure bureaucratic job, in D.C. as the recorder of deeds. Now, as a separate issue, because I would like to just link in a bit with the Cape Verdean story, is that in 1884, a few years afterwards, Europeans divided up the continent of Africa. Africans weren't even serving drinks. They were doing nothing in having the partition of Africa or the scramble for Africa by Europeans. Needless to say, Frederick Douglass would be no supporter of that whatsoever. And of course, Africans were resisting. Frederick Douglass did not join the armed resistance in Africa. He didn't join the armed resistance at Harper's Ferry, but needless to say, he was a supporter of that. Another chapter, of course, is that Brazil still was a slave-owning, legal slave trading, slave-owning country, and as much as we can determine, Frederick Douglass would have had a universalistic and global perspective, obviously being opposed to the same system which oppressed him. Of course, for Brazil, most of the slaves were from Africa, particularly from Angola, South Atlantic trade versus the North Atlantic trade. But some of them were from Guinea-Bissau or Portuguese Guinea and the Upper Guinea coast. And the vast majority of those slaves, like those who were on the Amistad, probably did pass through Cape Verde. Cape Verde had 3 different slave trades. It had the slave trade from the coast to Cape Verde, had the domestic slave trade within Cape Verde, even up till the 1860s, maybe even after that. And then it had the export slave trade. So all these pieces do ultimately fit together. Frederick Douglass has another fascinating story that my wife and Barbara and others have discovered, the case of Antenor Furman, who's the first person of African descent who was an anthropologist, and he was the foreign minister of Haiti. Fascinating person who wrote on the equality of human races, which is now available in English for the first time ever. And Douglass was sent down to meet Antenor Furman, a very fascinating, extremely rich part of the story. We could have seminars just on this one instance. And he was on the U.S. Navy ship, went down to Haiti, particularly, to Port-au-Prince, but to try to get naval access to the Mole of St. Nicholas in the western part of Haiti. There's just across the little gulf there. He was asked, because they figured, well, African American and Haitian American or Haitian they should have some natural affinity. Antenor Furman, rather young man, Frederick Douglass, a pretty old man at the time, they were admiring one another. He said, "It's such a pleasure," Frederick Douglass said, "It's such a pleasure to meet you, Antenor Furman. And now, because I'm on the mission for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. government, would you please give us landing rights for the strategic mole of St. Nicholas?" Antenor Furman said, "I have such high respect for you. I really love you. I've read your books and you're a fantastic person, but you're not going to get a centimeter of Haiti. We have struggled mightily, and still until today, Haitians are struggling as the first African republic in the New World for their independence. And so as a result of this refusal by Antenor Furman to Frederick Douglass, guess what happened? We got Guantanamo Bay. So Guantanamo Bay, which is of course the center for our Gitmo, prisoner camp, probably violating most international laws, came as a result of the specific interaction between Antenor Furman and Frederick Douglass. So there's a fantastic little story. Now, he never met Cabral, because Cabral was born only about, let's see, do the math, 3 decades later. But Cabral, of course, was the founder of Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau independence. And I can't point to any documents, I can't point to any contact that they had. That doesn't exist. But the inspiration of telling the truth, in the famous comment by Amilcar Cabral, "Tell no lies, claim no easy victories." It's so Douglassian that you can't believe it. So I think one can spiritually link these two people, without any trouble. One of the famous speeches that Cabral made at Syracuse University was an address called "National Liberation is an Act of Culture." And it's clear in the works of Douglass that sentiment, even though never expressed directly to Cabral for sure, was so much a part of Cabral. You can't make your own history until you are an independent people. You can't make your own history, and Cape Verde has one of the most distinguished histories of rising up after 500 years of Portuguese colonial occupation and having a one-party state, and then my friend Pedro Pires, with whom I was in the war in Guinea-Bissau, first elected independently and then elected to accept multi-party democracy and suspend uni-party state. So Cape Verde has been distinguished in Africa, although there are quite increasing number of African democratic states. You can see the organic linkage to the cosmic dust that's left over from Frederick Douglass was being breathed by Amilcar Cabral. So the giant is dead. Long live Frederick Douglass. Long may this giant live. In the field of freedom was planted, but the harvest of justice is still done. It needs to be done. So I'm asking rhetorically, what are you going to do tomorrow, next day, the rest of your life? Because the struggles of injustice are as present with us this very moment as they were the situation, the terrain of struggle, the context of struggle. It's going to be all different, but it's requiring to go forward in a progressive and enlightened way to follow the leadership of these very inspirational figures. Just as, here's a little image of Amilcar Cabral. The struggle continues on his stamps, and of course that's the flag up in the upper right-hand corner for Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verdean independence, and then the more recent flag in the lower left-hand corner, the current flag for Cape Verde. If somebody likes to read more about Cape Verde, read some of my books. So that's the end of my comments. And
He honors me so. I am honored to know both of them, Amina, the people in this room who came. I'm honored that all of you have arrived for this, and it's indeed a pleasure, more than you'll ever know. We're running a little bit late, so I'm going to try to go on quickly. The other thing that the grant required was that we have a facilitator, and that cannot be me. So I asked months ago my good friend and colleague in all things equal rights, civil rights, Jean Morrison. She received she's a counseling psychologist. She received her MED from Cambridge College. She grew up here on Cape Cod and knows very well. We've had a lot of discussions about race and racism on Cape Cod, unequal treatment, and the hope that what we're doing will help all of us collaborate to heal and move forward more equitably. She was a former assistant general manager of civil rights and diversity for the Mass Transit Authority. She does many programs, presentations on diversity and civil rights, and she is a diversity and civil rights consultant. So the perfect person to be our facilitator here. Jean Morrison, thank you.
Wow, some pretty people out there, and quite a diverse group, which really pleases me, because that's what this work is all about, bringing us together and to learn about each other. So a few quick comments that I want to make before I get started. I learned something today, and it's boa tarde, como aqui yonsta. Welcome, Kusta. Kusta. I'm learning it's like other languages. It depends on who tells you the pronunciation, which is important to know. I mean, even in the United States of America, where you speak and the words you use mean different things in other places, like water. So, in short, welcome and how are you? And today is about celebration of African ancestry and Cape Verdean ancestry, and some mention too has been of Native peoples. So think about how this history has impacted people of color in the United States and people from other cultures, because we all end up living together, don't we? And it's very important to hear from people like Dr. Loban, or to look at some of the books that he has about your own culture and other people's culture, because you know what? You learn something not only about other people, but about yourself. And to me, that's what brings people together. I do not do the diversity and civil rights work to segregate people. It's the contrary. I do it to establish, help people get the rights that they deserve, help make a better and more peaceful life for all of us. And how we do that is we get to know ourselves, we get to know others, and we get to know how we got here, how we relate, what food comes from here, and we realize that from many, we're really all one.
Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. This certainly sounds large and out of the common way, for it is true that I have often had the privilege to speak in this beautiful hall and to address many who now honor me with their presence. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude.
This, for the purpose of celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and your political freedom. This, to you,
is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, the story is simple that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its act, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at the distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid all of their terror and affrighted vociferation against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
I rise to make the comment, the first line of this very important part of the speech. Oppression makes a wise man mad is the title of a book that Barbara Burgo and Hannah Ressiger, who are sitting together, are co-editing with students from the classes from Rhode Island College, Anthropology of Race and Racism, and Critical Race Theory, that we taught, they participated in many decades ago, and now are co-editing a book with a half a dozen essays which will deal with the subject of how oppression can drive a sane person mad. And mad, I think, in the two meanings of that word. insane or troubled and angry.
Can I make a comment? Yes, clap. Thank you for the book. And a perfect example of Frederick Douglass lives on. My comment about oppression is I implore people, all of you, to think about oppression, not of those who are the oppressed as being the only people who suffer madness. The more we allow oppression to continue, its reach goes farther and farther and farther. If you think about economic divide in this country, if you think about who has opportunity to even have a home to live in this country, there are lots of ways to think about oppression, and I really implore you again to understand that, and to, when you see it and it's something you can do about oppression, do something. Because oppression affects all of us, not just the oppressed. That's the short of what I wanted to say about that.
I have the honor of reading next. Number 6. On the 2nd of July, 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal. It resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Thank you, Carol. And just the Affirmative Action Committee of Falmouth, they all agreed, as I was printing all of this, to come here and just honor us with this. And Trish is a Barnstable County Human Rights Commissioner, of which I was the chair of the commission for 2 years with Trish. They're amazing. Thank you so much for being here and for their support. So this is the Affirmative Action Committee.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ringbolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Fellow citizens, I'm not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
And because I have great honor to be Portuguese, Brazilian, and celebrating my 10 years of American, I will read in both languages. They love their country better than their own private interests. Eles amaram o seu país mais acima dos seus interesses. And they will concede that as a rare virtue. Nós temos que considerar isso como uma grande virtude. And ought command respect. E devemos respeitá-los. He will intelligently lay down his life for his countries. Deram sua vida ao seu país. It's a man who, from his not human nature to dispute. É uma grande virtude humana, não podemos disputar, claro. Your fathers started their lives, dedicaram a sua vida, their fortunes, a sua fortuna, e a sua sagrada honra and the sacred honor on the cause of their own countries, a causa do seu país.
Thank you. And Mass Humanities also translated the medium version into both Haitian, Creole, and Spanish. If anyone wanted to try that, but if you want to take a copy, I have it.
Where's
Jean. Jean, go ahead.
Okay.
Number 10.
Dr. Pilgrim isn't here.
Amina? Come on up.
It's your turn.
Your turn. You can read in Creole.
Followed by Christina and then Barbara.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating, against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. So I'll do a brief summary in Creole. Es era um homem de paz. Es preferi revolução através de submissão com paz. Es preferi paz através de escravatura. Es era homem silencioso, mas es que tinha medo de agir contra a opressão. Es mostrou coragem, mas es sabia limite de coragem. Es acredita na ordem, mas não na ordem de violência. Pois nada que era bom, que era justo. Pois justiça, liberdade e humanidade era final, não escravatura com opressão. Budebe de valor memória de que és homem, desde era grande nesses dias e nessas geração. Sua reputação é mais grande ao que no comparar sua reputação com a reputação de homens de hoje. That's the best I can do.
Thank you.
Oh, you good?
That's very graceful.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all of their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them, your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary.
This is actually a good place to pause, Barbara, if you don't mind. Should we?
I'm ready. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So, any comments? What do you think Frederick Douglass is saying here to this point? Because it's building up to something. Yes.
I think all that was written, it said, the land of the free and the home of the brave, but it is the land of the struggling freedom and the home of the brave immigrants who were brave. This country was started by immigrants, and it is a nation of immigrants. And, he started that. He started the rise to freedom. And it needs to be freedom for all the people that have come to the United States.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Was very good. I'm sorry. Other comments?
I can't help but think of the parallel between the opening sections here of this speech and what's considered the mudsill theory of Abraham Lincoln. And that the praise that he puts to the forefathers while challenging the implementation of that theory is building the foundation and the mudsill that will then hold a house that cannot be divided. But it's interesting to see at the beginning how much grace he has in affirming the foundational basis for the challenges that we have ahead.
Does that resonate with anyone today? Anybody want to comment on how that might parallel today? Today meeting these times? Thank you, John.
At first I wasn't going to say anything, but it becomes rather obvious that we must. We look at the reason for a Frederick Douglass and the role Frederick Douglass played throughout the 19th century. He didn't just stand for the abolition of slavery or recruitment of Mass 54th or Mass 55th. He also had concerns about Irish repression against the British. He also knew that the suffragette movement excluded women from the political forefront. I am a historian myself. I didn't want to say that with him there. I'm thinking to myself, okay, let me be quiet for a while, but when it's my turn to spot, we will. We look at the entire document, and I'm looking at the other parts. He challenged the church. He wanted to know why church leaders would not stand up and say something, particularly in pulpits where pure hypocrisy was taking place. Where you can't say, and I know this because the Zion Union Heritage Museum, which I run in Hyannis, we had a problem. The founding of the burial place was founded by people who were disenfranchised at another church. So when it came over to form the Zion Union Church in 1909, the question asked, how well did they know Frederick Douglass' struggle? The struggle continued. It is not over. If you sit down and say nothing, don't complain, because there will be nothing happening for you.
Thanks, John. I told you he was a good teacher. And does know a lot of history. I just want to make one comment before I forget it. Oh, I forgot it. It might come back to me. I'm sorry. I'm just reaching that age. I'm trying to adjust it. You did great, though.
Real quick, I just wanted to add that although we are a nation of immigrants, we need to acknowledge the 500 nations of indigenous people that were here first, and that the African people that were brought here were not brought here or did not come here as immigrants, that they were kidnapped and tortured and brought here against their will. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I also wanted to just point out in paragraph 10 where he says they were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. I really like that line.
Thank you for that. But speaking on behalf of my indigenous heritage, my African heritage, I'm very glad to be American, regardless of who is here and how I got here. But at the same time, I'm damn sure going to continue to fight for the rights of being part of this land. So I appreciate those comments.
Just a comment.
Yes.
I tried to bring it forth as I was doing my reading, and I didn't realize this initially. As he's speaking, he keeps referring to his audience. It's your nation. It's your country. It's your national. So as he's talking about the nationalism, he's talking about that. He's talking about you, not me. And he never says ours or we. I thought that was really interesting. I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen in the rest
Yeah,
of
I don't
this.
want to comment because that's a very good observation and correct. And there's some reasoning for it, I believe.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to say was about the Indians and the women were not in that courtroom. But he spoke for all of us, even the national heritage, the true indigenous people, the Native Americans.
I just remembered what I wanted to say. It was about the women's suffrage movement. When you get a chance, please Google Frederick Douglass' role in that because it's very important. And all women in this country should understand the weight of these words at a speech that happened in New York just before the ratification of the women's right to vote. His impassioned speech, much like this one, helped move things. And at the same time, something not so good happened to people of color. So the women's vote got pushed forward. There was a 15th Amendment that had already been there to allow the vote of African American men, right? Or 13, 15. Excuse me?
Yes.
I'm looking at these two, right? Yes. And so there was a trade-off. Who was going to get what? And we know that, you know the history, I think, and what happened there. But please Google that. And also, this is the 100th year celebration of the women's suffrage movement. And women of color were very involved in that too, so another thing you should research. And if you can be a part of the movement, you might hear through Barbara or I or the Zion or the NAACP, which decides to partner with us, some celebrations for women's suffrage movement that are inclusive, that might have on the Cape. So that's what I wanted to mention about that. And who was next, Barbara? Any other comments? Yes.
There's a little pilgrimage that you can make to Rochester, New York, which is where the North Star was published. There's a cemetery, it's the Mount Hope Cemetery, which is where Frederick Douglass is buried, but he's buried not far from Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. He really put it all together, because, you know, in our country, we're very good at separating. This is a race question, this is a woman's question, this is, put it all together. Race, gender, class, oppression, bottom line is oppression, and where oppression exists, you fight it, you fight against it. Now today it's immigrants, it's innocent people, it's children in cages, it keeps changing, but this is what Frederick Douglass and those pioneering feminists were all about. He was a feminist, he was an anti-racist, he was anti-imperialist, his story goes on and on. He's a key member of the abolitionist movement. He was absolutely central to their success.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left to read through as much of the speech. I don't know if we'll get through all of it, but we might try. We'll just
get
go.
through all of it because right now we're going to speed it up. Okay, so I just wanted you to see what the beginning would be like to be able to have each one of those folks read. And where are we now? Which one are we on? 12. And Hannah's, so there's no one specific after me, right? So I'm going to read 12, 13, 14, Hannah's going to read 15, 16, 17. We're going to have John read, and anybody else who wants to. Anyone who wants to take one. We'll do 2 or 3 at a time, okay? My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and His cause is the ever-living now. We have to do what the past only as we have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's labor in the labor, to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessing resulting from your independence to us? You know I hesitate, I will say it in a minute. Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. I paused there because I couldn't help but think of Colin Kaepernick and his need to kneel. It was a need, it was a request. It wasn't disrespectful. How many people before him have kneeled? Please research the history of the kneel. And I will tell you this as well. I put back on my afro instead of perming it to look a little more acceptable to the white crowd, because my afro means to me, like Kaepernick, that this is the whole being that I should be proud of. There's a new initiative just discussed on TV that's called Crown. This is the hair God gave me. Please don't ask to touch if you don't ask to touch his and his. Please don't say it feels like steel wool like they used to say in Raytheon in 1969 when I was a kid. Please don't ask me how I do this. It's just hair.
But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers, is this shared by you, not by me? The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me, speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of this nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future.
Here, here.
Very good.
And is a famous spoken word artist at Rhode Island College. And Rhode Island. Next, who wants to go?
Who wants to go next? I do it, John? Okay. Yep, I'm coming.
The next two, read the next two, please.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is better, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetrate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word will escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just. I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists failed to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more or rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue?
Must I undertake to prove that a slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in an enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in states of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, subject to him to be punishment of death. While only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that a slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? Southern state statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of a slave to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I will make essential argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish in the sea, and the reptiles that crawl, shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue with you that a slave is a man.
I'll read it. Go right ahead, next two.
Come on.
Come on.
Come on. It's all right.
All right, what number is it? 21?
22.
For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. It is not astonishing that, while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in the metals of the brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that, while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that, while we are engaged in all manner of the enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What am I to argue that it is wrong to make them brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow man, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters. Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. And I can only imagine how he would have been forceful in his speech and how he sounded. I don't sound like him, I'm a woman, but I'm sure. Does someone else want to speak?
I'd like to make a comment.
Just briefly, I wonder when President Obama talked about the original sin of slavery, if he was not, he didn't refer to it explicitly, but there in 18, Frederick Douglass says, slavery, the great sin and shame of America. And I also wanted to remark in 23 that there is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong. I would say to them, there is not a human being in the United States who does not know that putting children in cages and turning away immigrants who are suffering in their own countries and not affording them asylum, that there is a person who does not know that that is wrong. And there are these hypocrites who are defending the indefensible. So just come back to Douglas to counter these arguments which are specious and have no basis in morality or humanity, and call them out for what they are.
You did it right.
I just wanted to acknowledge what the professor said about until we acknowledge the history, reparations, then we can deal with the reparations. I believe that people are so ignorant to history, and we hear things like "get over it." We didn't do that to you. Maybe your ancestors did way back then. And I think until we acknowledge that history, it's like, see me. I've been on this Cape for 30 years plus. Serving and doing in every capacity for the least of these. And sometimes I wonder, do people see me and see my contributions to this, community and to this world at large? So until we see each other's history, until we see each other as human, we all bleed red, we all love our families and want the best for our families and our loved ones in our communities, I don't think we can heal. So, I'm committed to that people would see people of color and others as one. Does anyone know what number we're on? 25. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is a blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhumane cannot divine. Who can reason on such proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer, your 4th of July. I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty and unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Wow.
Take the American slave trade, which is especially prosperous just now. It carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy. In several states, this trade is the chief source of wealth. It's called the internal slave trade, in order to divert it from the horror which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. This trade has long been denounced by this government as piracy, as inexorable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron, U.S. Navy Squadron, Africa Squadron, by the way, at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it's safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as the most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to all the laws of God and man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the very men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Two things. Most of the people who owned the slave ships were New England sea captains. They were not somebody from another place. And one of the other things that's most important about this is that when the African Slave Trade Act was passed, in 1808 saying no more importation of Africans. What began to happen was an internal business, and this business became kind of slick. If you were in the upper South, meaning Virginia, the Carolinas, you did not want to get sent to Mississippi or Western Georgia or Alabama, because you may not be coming back. Even when the Scotch-Irish came, they went to the frontier after the 7-year period of redemption, but they too were slave owners. Some blacks were slave owners. Some folks in Louisiana were slave owners, and they were people of color. They weren't just white people. I'm not here to defend white or black, but I am here to defend civil rights of everybody, particularly those who continually become victims of the civil rights. Where I'm getting tired of people calling. Joe DeLuz used to tell me it'll be a good day when we don't have the NAACP anymore. Well, I even did 2 cases this month over something very trivial, but not in that person's case. I learned a very hard lesson from history, from Douglas, from the civil rights movement myself, because I was involved. Here's a hard lesson. What you think is not important is very important to other people. So we have to learn to have some empathy and some respect. So at least you understand their point of view and they don't have to hear it. You expound yours.
All right, we're gonna ring it.
All right. Come on.
And its other half.
Okay.
And it's a better word.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade. The American slave trade sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover. I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh drivers armed with pistol, whip, and bowling knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. There are food for the cotton fields and the deadly sugar mill. Mark the sad precision as it moves wearily along, and the inhumane wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oath as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There see the old men with locks thin and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother, whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arm. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank and the chains rattle simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child, and her chains that gash on her shoulders tell her to move.
Please tell them, 1 second, tell them you went to, we also hosted, some of us, a white privilege conference in Lynn. I had one here 2 years ago. And who did you meet up there at the white privilege conference that you were so honored to meet?
Tell you? Oh yeah, Yusuf Islam.
Yusuf Salam. Who is Yusuf Salam?
One of the 5 exonerated Central Park.
Central Park.
Oh.
Yeah, they're called the exonerated 5 now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exonerated.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, one of those crime show PBS things had a story on about them, and they were on a panel talking about what it was like to give up so much of their life wrongly accused. There's a movement against these men to say they should not have been exonerated, that there are still people convinced that these men are guilty, and that's how they live their life now.
Your question.
Thank you.
Follow the drove to New Orleans. Attend the auctions. See men examined like horses. See the form of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of the American slave buyer. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from the scattered multitudes. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, can you witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking? Yet, this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the United States. Fellow citizen, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of the fettering humanity. On the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyer and seller of men. By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and to sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but it is now an institution of the whole United States.
Barbara,
who's next? Go ahead.
Something briefly, Barbara, about institutionalized racism. Because I think as this has been being read, and by the way, more passionately by each person as we go on, since Anna, it resonates a lot in me personally. I cannot speak for other people of what it must have felt like in that day. And God forbid, slavery is gone, but the residual of slavery is still here. The laws that kept slavery active and then followed by the Jim Crow laws still have reaching arms to people of color. And I just have to put it out there that you see what this theme of what he's building, this is who you are. That's his reason for the us and them. This is who you are as a nation, and through laws and a way of life, and making this all right in your minds. Like, how can you possibly think this is okay? So something had to happen. People had to have a sickness develop to keep it so strong. And the clause of those laws got put into the United States. And when we say is institutionalized racism, we mean it. We're not trying to make people feel bad. We're trying to break the rest of that bondage and the rest of those chains that follow us around. They follow us around when you go into a store that someone thinks you shouldn't be in. This is 2019, I can tell you. Just within the month, it has happened to me. When you go through Yarmouth and you get pulled over because you have a sports car with your 80-year-old mother, and there's no real reason with your lights on. It's daylight.
I say to everyone,
so that's all I had to say, but go ahead.
I say to everyone, and this is true. I moved to Brewster from Taunton. My grandmother was lived in Harwich. My mom was born in Harwich and moved to Taunton. Harwich wasn't so welcoming to me in my museum project when I put on my fro and said I was black. This is the truth. But Brewster, I moved out there 4 years ago. They have been warm and welcoming to me. I'm a housing authority commissioner. I was voted in, and all these wonderful things, except wasn't I ever disappointed to be stopped twice in 6 months once I put on my afro. It was at dusk. They couldn't tell who was driving, so with my fro, I was stopped twice. And guess what? He was a black cop, one of the brand new black cops in Brewster. So this insidious institutional racism goes right through the black and blue.
And I would not be a diversity consultant if I didn't add if I didn't help to turn this in a way to unite us and strengthen us as a union. I was going to say add a positive spin. But it's not positive when you feel like crap, just for being who you are. However, the passion and the emotion that you feel us using as we tell these stories, imagine that turning into positive change, positive energy, positive of the good value, intellect, insight of the other side that you can bring to the table to help this country blossom into the richness and diversity that we all are and that we all have.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for allowing us that.
Amen.
Church is tomorrow.
We'll invite you. It's right here, right now.
Sorry.
Okay.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird with a sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad republican domain is hunting ground for men. Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included. For black men, there are neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns into slavery, and 5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witness for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. We are telling it today.
We have time.
Thank you. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding the case of a man's liberty
to hear only his accusers.
Read the next one.
Okay. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation. I just wanted to say, I am a neighbor of Frederick Douglass, if you will. One of his two houses in Rochester, New York, is just up the street from my house. I come in honor of this man, and here in the town where I grew up, I am hearing his words and their power today, and I thank you all.
This is a good, it says to pause here.
Okay.
And this is a good time. I want to mention to people that paragraph 37, and I asked her to read on to 38, resonates with me, and I want you all to think about the criminal justice system today, right now, and the things that you hear about it. I'm not going to quote you statistics. So, again, part of this is challenging you to embrace the history and learn on your own, and it will be shocking if you don't already know what the statistics are. And it says black man for black and brown men too. Yeah.
We're on the same page because these are evocative of the composition of American prisons, which are now privatized to a very large extent. It's basically neo-slavery.
It's a money maker.
It's a money
People don't
maker.
realize they're making money.
And making furniture and making license plates that you pay for, and your tax dollars get wasted, for prosecuting people. We have the counterpart of black men getting shot disproportionately to every major. And this all costs money, legal fees and taxes. Wouldn't you rather have your money go to some useful cause rather than just into oppression?
But wouldn't you rather have a productive, strong citizen rather than putting someone in a cage to rot away for the rest of their life and then paying for it?
Or in unemployment, which is especially high in black community, minority communities, and Native American reservations, high suicide rates. All these things are very costly in the human treasury. So I'd like to pass this on to number 39. I think you'd like to read that out.
So this is the president of our newly established Cape Cod Cape Verdean Museum and Cultural Center. Good friend now. And my savior, him and Rep. David Vieira, and I hope Senator Vinnie Dempsey and everyone in this room. We're going to quicken this up, but this is also a part of what we're trying to do, kind of brick and mortar space down here, so that really the Cape Verdean, the African American, the black, the brown, the native people, the Wampanoags that we intermarried with and love so much, can have a place to proudly call our own and really talk about the reality of what this country is all about. We love it, but it sometimes doesn't love us enough. This is Wesley Lake, and I thank you, sir, for taking on this challenge.
Also, I'm the president of the Cape Verdean Club, which is our local Cape Verdean club that's been here for 78 years. We are the oldest Cape Verdean club in the United States. And we're the only Cape Verdean club in Cape Cod. So that's something to be proud of. I'm surprised they let us stay there that long. We fought often and hard, believe me. It hasn't been easy. All right, Americans. Your republic politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your poor Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your Athamanist, I don't know what that word is. Athamanist, yeah, they can believe me, take that one out. at the crown-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourself consent to be the mere tools of bodyguards of tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives, oppressions from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovation, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But fugitives from your own land, you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill.
Continue.
Which we see currently today.
Continue, number 40.
Your discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which in its very essence casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet you wring the last hard-earned fathering from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that one of blood, God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred, and all men whose skins are not colored like your own. You declare before the world and are understood by the world to declare that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in your bondage, which according to your own Thomas Jefferson is worse than ages of that which your fathers, should have been fathers, right, rose in rebellion to oppose a seventh part of inhabitants of your country. Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies that existence of slavery in this country. Brand your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name hissing. And by word to a mocking earth. Be warned, a horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from your hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 million crush and destroy it forever.
That's what you call telling people off. Telling it like it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Anna to read 43 and 44 because I think Frederick Douglass, probably after this magnificent, and this is a short version, speech, and really getting the day heated, probably eloquently spoke with power for the last couple of lines, and I think we'll get our expert speaker to do that, please, if you would.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work in the downfall of slavery. I, therefore, leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference. The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it, all. Godspeed, the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come, fuse to end, and change into a faithful friend, each foe.
We're late, and I appreciate you staying, but before anything else, before anyone goes, this is one of my favorite songs, one of my favorite parts, and I don't want you to leave without hearing this, and I appreciate your patience. So this is Candida Rose, and you'll know what she's singing. Just take my glasses. It's okay.
I've been running ever since. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know the change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. Said I go to the movies and I go still always asking me why you hanging around. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. Then I go to my brother, and I say, brother, help me please. Somehow he winds up knocking me back down to my knees. Last long, but now I know there's change is gonna come. Said a change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. Said a change